I'm Rich Boggiano. I was born and raised in Manhattan, and I went to school in New York City. I learned about history of the United States through my grammar school, high school, and college. I was raised downtown along 14th Street, and later on my family moved to Washington Heights. At first grade, I saw my friend, we came home for lunch, and on my way back, I was walking towards his house to pick him back up. I saw all police cars and fire trucks and everything. My friend was killed in an elevator at 7 years old, 8 years old, and I saw this. It was one of those gated elevators, and he got crushed by the elevator. That's a part of my memory that I will never forget. I saw a lot of other things growing up in Washington Heights, but I grew up with a great group of people, and I'm still friends with the people I grew up with. And once a year we get together and we meet down in North Carolina at the Outer Banks. My vivid first memories of a young kid was watching Manhattan, the changes in Manhattan, especially in Washington Heights. And I belonged to a large group of kids up in the Heights. We had a group called the Vikings, and we next to us were called the Rebels. We were, pretty wild bunch of people growing up in the city in those days. I was raised actually in the fish markets in New York. I worked with my uncles, my great uncles in the fish markets. My father was in banking and rose to a very high level in First National City Bank and with Citicorp. I always wanted to be in the fish business, but preferentially I chose to become a police officer later on in life and left the fish markets. When I finished grammar school, I started high school at Xavier, downtown Manhattan, and I stayed there for 2 years, and to my third year I left because I received a 74, I believe, in Latin. 75 was passing, and that was a spiteful thing done by a teacher who came from London who had no love for me. So then I went up to the Bronx, to Cardinal Hayes High School, which is a great school, and I ended up graduating from Cardinal Hayes. From there, I went over to part of CCNY, which is Bronx Community College, and I started until I joined the Marine Corps. I saw Washington Heights changing. I saw, as I said, I came from a really good family. And I started hanging around the streets, and I said, let me get out of here. Washington Heights was changing. It was becoming a gang-oriented area. There was a lot of problems going on. I said, before I get myself in trouble, let me join the Marines, which I did. It taught me to be a man, taught me to have respect for myself and others. And it was the Marine Corps is a great organization and great people. I learned to have respect for the country. I learned to have respect for the Marines and anybody who served. And I'm proud to say that anybody who serves their country in the military, you got to have a lot of respect for. I was also in the Army. When I was in the police department later on in life, when Iraq broke out, I joined the Army. I wanted to be in the fish markets with the family. They had several markets throughout the city. They were quite big in the fish industry. But as I got older, I decided that fish business was 7 days a week, 16 hours a day, and I wanted a life. So my father talked me into going into banking for a while, but that was not for me because I'm just not a person who caters to presidents of a bank and large corporations. I did have one very fascinating thing. It was 61, I guess it was. I was working for the bank, and the president of the bank hurt his leg, and they cut off one of his toes, I believe, with a lawnmower. And I had an office outside of his office, and he came out to me and he said, his name was Mr. Ramsey. He said, how would you like to drive me back and forth to work? I said, I understand you go to the shore every night because your parents have a house down there during the summer. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, you can have a car, a nice, beautiful car, and which at that time was great with the boardwalk and all the young ladies down the shore. So I said, sure, I'll go down. I'll drive you back and forth. But only under one condition, and that was wherever you go, I go. I had breakfast with John F. Kennedy. We had breakfast with the Rockefellers. I met some very interesting people. But that breakfast, one breakfast, was one thing that changed my life, because I realized nobody is better than you. And no matter where you go, you are the same as anybody else. And I sat with him on many breakfasts with presidents of banks and high-ranking people. I realized that he, as a president of a bank, and me as a person who was just started in banking, that no matter who you are, you're on the same level as everybody else. You're a person, and when I came to Jersey City, this reminds me, I went into we were having a party and I had to go into the men's room, and there, standing next to me in the men's room, was the mayor of Jersey City. And when I came out, there was a detective outside saying, like, you know who you were standing next to in the bathroom? And I looked at him and I said, yeah, I know who he was. He was the mayor. So what? And he just looked at me like, well, if people just kept in life that everybody is equal, everybody's the same, nobody's better than anybody else. And I learned that as, and then also growing up in the fish markets, I became, I guess, a little arrogant, and I guess a little stubborn, because I grew up with old Italians who, ran the fish markets, and it was a great life. I think I broke my father's heart when I became a police officer, and because he wanted me to stay in banking. My mother's side of the family wanted me to stay in the fish business, and I was torn apart. So I started working over in Jersey City at Hudson City Savings Bank. I took the police test here, and that was, 1973. No. And I fulfilled the dream I always wanted to do, become a police officer. And I spent 36 wonderful years in the Jersey City Police Department. I had a tremendous experience. I worked in all four. I worked in the Juvenile Bureau. I worked in the 2nd Precinct. I worked in the 5th Precinct. And then towards the end of my career, in the last 10 years, I worked at the Police Academy, which I really loved, training recruits. And it was an enjoyable life. And there were a lot of highlights. First of all, I met a lot of tremendous people here in Jersey City in the police department. I got involved with neighborhood groups. When I moved into the neighborhood I'm living in now, there was an organization called the Hilltop Neighborhood Association, which became probably the largest block association in Jersey City, and we still exist. And I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed working with people. I enjoyed being a police officer, helping people. When I retired from the police department, 2008, and I stayed home for a couple of years, and I decided I wanted to get into politics. And I ran the first time. My mistake was I didn't get my sons involved, my daughter involved. I was running for councilperson at large at that time. And back in 1989, I was arrogant. I ran for mayor. And that was, I just did it as basically to see what would happen. I did quite well there, but spending no money when these guys were spending hundreds of thousands and the mayors were spending millions. I spent nothing really, but I did well. And then I ran for at large. But as I said, my mistake was I did not get my sons involved. And this time when I ran, I got my sons and daughter involved, and they did tremendous work, along with the people that were involved with me. I had a great group of people. My 2 sons fulfilled a dream of mine. I wanted to go to West Point, but when I left Xavier, that ended that. But my 2 sons did go to West Point. They graduated West Point, and I'm proud of them. They served in Iraq. My one son has quite a few medals, from Iraq with Fallujah. And I'm still involved with West Point, very involved with West Point today, because we run a program here in the city called Winning the Peace. And Winning the Peace involves the Muslim community, the Coptic community, the Jewish community, the Christian community, and it's been going on for 15 years. It's known worldwide. One time we had TV cameras stationed here. We broadcasted throughout Iraq, in England, France, Germany, and what it did was we brought cadets, the seniors, down, maybe 29, 30 of them, that were going to be heading to Iraq right after they graduated, and we introduced them to the Muslim culture and the different cultures of what they can expect when they got over to Iraq. and it's been publicized in every major newspaper throughout the United States, and we're doing it again this year. It's a fantastic program. My daughter was going to go to West Point, and thank God at the last moment the war was on, she decided not to, and she's a professional speech therapist. And, you know, 3 wonderful kids, but when I got them involved in my political career, they were fantastic. They knew how to do everything, how to set everything up, how to get the publicity, and it proved it worked quite. And I'm going to continue staying independent and be very vocal about how I feel.
You also have, as I know, you have a reputation for your interest in history, and particularly the history of Jersey City. Tell us a little bit about that.
The history of Jersey City, when I was doing my master's, I went into the basement of a Greenville library, and down there were books from the 1800s, possibly some books from 1700s. And I started reading because I was doing the history of the Jersey City Police Department, an 80-page paper, and I had to do research. So when I was a walking cop in the South District, I would go into the library during lunchtime, and I'd sit down and I'd read some history. And I went down the basement and I saw these books, and I said, oh God, what the hell is going on here? And I found out that Henry Hudson, what I was taught in school in New York, never landed in Manhattan. He landed here in Jersey City by the Holland Tunnel. I learned that the reason he did was because there were whales all over that side of the river, and the sailing ships couldn't get there. I learned that probably one of the major battles of the Revolutionary War was right here in Jersey City, the Battle of Paul's Hook, the turning point probably of the Revolution. And another major discovery was that probably the Revolution was saved by a woman from Jersey City, Mrs. Tours. And this is documented, that she used to go over to Black Sam's Hotel in New York and sell vegetables. And Black Sam housed the high-ranking generals of the British Army. He told her, get back to Jersey, get the word up to Washington that they planned to attack what is today West Point, Fort Constitution, Fort Kosciuszko, Fort Montgomery, and the war would be over because the war would be finished. She comes back over to Jersey that night on a skiff and tells her brother-in-law, Van Ripen, to get up there to let Washington know. She hadn't done what she did and got back here, the war would have been over, and Benedict Arnold would have been a hero for the British. And that's a fact, but actually a woman saved the American Revolution.
Where did your knowledge and appreciation of Alexander Hamilton begin?
That's years ago when I was doing actually my research for my master's. And before that, my father, who was into history, told me about Alexander Hamilton coming over here, subdividing plots of land. You never learn anything about the history on this side of the river. And the reason being is that New York rules and Jersey's been shoved aside. And over the last 400 years, our politicians have just backed off and did what they're told. But nobody wants to change history and tell the truth. So, you know, but Alexander Hamilton, he founded basically, started subdividing the plots of land here in Jersey City. He had a great vision of Jersey City, the great city on the West Bank. But Jersey City will never be that great city on the West Bank unless the interior of the city is developed, which is happening right now in Journal Square. And we have some Journal Square, it's like the Times Square of New York. It fell into decay and disrepair over the last 30 years, 35 years, but hopefully it's going to come back.